I don't know if it's recording or not, but I'm going to go for it. Hello, everyone. Our topic is called Ethics of Treatment Approaches, and our group members are me, Matthew Dunn, Maria Morales, Emily Perez, and Leah Subrizi. The structure of the debate is Maria is the pro stater who's going to make her points, and then Leah is going to state her counterpoints. Maria is then going to prove her points. Leah is going to prove her con points. I'm the pro attacker. Emily is the con attacker. And then the pro stater is going to salvage all the undamaged arguments. And then finally, the con stater is going to salvage all the intact arguments. Although ABA has a long history of developing evidence-based treatments that positively improve the maladaptive behaviors associated with individuals with autism, it continues to be considered unethical by some individuals with disabilities, advocates, and professionals. Throughout our debate, there were certain codes that apply to each group member's viewpoint. The codes are Code 101, Reliance on Scientific Knowledge, Codes 209, Treatment and Intervention Efficacy, A, B, C, and D, Codes 4, 0 to 411, Behavior Analysts and the Behavior Change Program, Code 5, Behavior Analysts as Supervisors, Code 7 to 702, Behavior Analysts Ethical Responsibility to Colleagues, Codes 9 to 909, Behavior Analysts and Research. So now I'm going to switch it over to Maria so she can offer her viewpoint.
Hi, this is Maria Morales. I'm going to talk to you about response, interruption, and redirection. And I'm going to click this screen share button so I can read some of my slides. Stimulatory behaviors take away from learning. Response interruption has been shown to be effective in reducing various topographies of stereotypy by Asman and Brzezowski, 1980, Sprague, Holling, and Thomas, 1997. Several studies have evaluated a variation of this intervention called response interruption and redirection, which consists of interrupting the target response and redirecting the individual to engage in a different response. Cited by Ahern, Clark, McDonald, and Chung, 2007, Athens, Balmer, Sloman, and St. Peter Prepkin, 2008. Ahern et al. Evaluated an response interruption redirection intervention in which the participants were interrupted and redirected to appropriate vocalizations via social questions and vocal imitation trials. There was an experiment with two boys, Chris and Adam. The methods that were utilized by the participants were the two boys who were diagnosed with severe autism. Chris, a 7-year-old and 2-month-old, and Adam, a 4-year, 11-month-old. Both boys engaged in high levels of vocal stereotypy that occurred across the day and interfered with their learning. Vocal stereotypy consisted of a variety of vocalizations and repetition of words and phrases. Prior to the study, both participants demonstrated that they could follow at least 15 one-step directions, stand up, turn around, and could appropriately imitate similar motor movements with 100% accuracy. When modeled by an instructor, sessions were conducted 5 days per week in their areas. Response measurement and reliability for vocal stereotypy was defined as non-contextual vocalizations as well as contextual vocalizations repeated within 3 seconds of a similar vocalization. For example, saying ball repetitively when seeing a ball. Appropriate vocalizations were defined as contextual vocalizations that were not repeated within 3 seconds of a similar vocalization. Time sampling was selected as the data collection system because it has been shown to result in fewer errors rather than either partial or whole interval recordings, cited by Alvaro, Strauss, and Rappaport, 2008. At the time of each measurement, for example, at 10 seconds, the experimenter observed the participant for 5 seconds to obtain an adequate sample of the vocal stereotypy. You will soon see in figure 1, it would depict the percentage of intervals with vocal stereotypy and the percentage of time spent in treatment during the treatment analysis and in generalization probes. Vocal stereotypy for both participants was high and a variable during baseline. Response interruption and redirection resulted in an immediate and substantial decrease in vocal stereotypy that remained relatively stable throughout the phase. For both participants, vocal stereotypy was lower in the initial session during the return to baseline and subsequently increased as sessions continued. Chris and Adams' graphs depicts baselines and RIRD with novel instructor and baseline with RIRD time in treatment. 2 different graphs will be shown. Effects of treatment were replicated in the second RIRD phase, the high level of vocal stereotypy. In session 30, for Adam coincided with illness.
Now we are going to switch it over to Leah to present her points.
Hi everyone, my name is Leah Subrizi and I will be presenting the con aspect of the counter arguments, why ABA is not ethical. So I'll share my screen to show some of my slides. So ABA is supported by research as being an effective treatment for individuals with autism, but when you really look at it, is it truly ethical? For many reasons based on research, it is not. Aspects such as overtreating behaviors, harmful procedures that are harmful and or distracting to others other than the individual, the inability to express feelings or emotions from the individual with autism, and ultimately it's unfair and cruel to the client. So when considering overtreating, over the years, behaviors being treated by ABA were overly inclusive of self-stimulatory behaviors such as hand flapping and rocking. Research is needed to prove that certain behaviors truly impact the individual's daily living. So this quote I found in the research from The Unstranged Mind from 2016, if the behavior is not affecting the client's safety or well-being, does it need to be treated? Working very closely with behavior analysts, I see behaviors being treated that are not in the direct impact of the child's safety or in their well-being, simple enough that it is just to eliminate their outbursts in the community to draw attention to them in the community. So according to Ethical Code 2.9b, behavior analysts have the responsibility to advocate for the appropriate amount and level of service provision and oversight required to meet the defined behavior change program goals. So if the behavior change program goal is not targeting a behavior that is directly affecting the child's safety, does it really need to be targeted is what we're talking about when we're referring to overtreating. Historically, research has targeted behaviors that interfere with learning. However, recent research suggests and proves that self-stimulatory behaviors in individuals specifically with autism are more conducive to their learning patterns. So instead of looking at how can we make these children appear to be like they're typically developing peers in terms of how they learn or interact with the environment, how can we use their unique capabilities to their advantage and make their programming based on those instead of just submitting them to these reinforcement or punishment procedures to eliminate those behaviors. In addition, ABA treatments are distracting and harmful to others. So response interruption and redirection is a common used practice in ABA, as Maria discussed, and these consist of very lengthy processes. Some can last from anywhere from 6 minutes to 10 minutes, but there are many that last from 30 minutes or more at a time, especially when the behavior is more difficult. ABA sessions are frustrating and tedious for not only the client, but also for the client's family. There's a lot of research out there about how ABA is so effective for the individual. However, there's not much research on how it affects people that surround the individual. ABA therapies have been shown to have possible negative impacts on parent-sibling relationships, parent-parent relationships, and sibling relationships between the individual with ASD and their typically developing sibling. I'm going to share this slide again because there are a few quotes on here from the research that really emphasize this point. Stimulatory behavior is defined as the repetition of physical movements, sounds, or words, or the repetitive movement of objects common in individuals with developmental disabilities and most prevalent in people with autism. So ABA therapies seek to eliminate behaviors that are not normal, but there was never a definition of what is normal. There are many stereotypical behaviors that are not as obvious, but are still being subject to treatment procedures just based on their lack of normality, quote unquote. ABA therapies teach individuals with autism that there is something fundamentally wrong and unacceptable of who they are. So they see these self-stimulatory behaviors as normal to them. They come naturally to them, but their teachers and parents and peers are constantly telling them that they can't do that. They can't flap their hands. They can't exhibit these behaviors that are necessary to them. So it's ultimately teaching them that they're unacceptable in society. Lastly, ABA is cruel and unfair overall to individuals with autism, as well as the other individuals that are involved, such as families and peers. ABA places a very strong emphasis on normality, despite the discomfort, disinterest, and fear that it instills in the individual. So making eye contact is generally a tough situation for individuals with autism because most of the time it causes them complete discomfort. However, most therapies subject them to constant eye contact to expose them to this behavior, despite the fact that it's making them uncomfortable. Therapy sessions are overwhelming and tiresome, and just to look at how long a typical ABA therapy session lasts, it's typically 40 hours per week, give or take, which ultimately boils down to 160 hours a month and 2,000 hours a year. This therapy is offered for children ages 3 to 21 and then older in an adult continuum program. And these small children are being subjected to basically full-time jobs just through their therapy. Therapy should make a child better, not traumatize them for life. This is a quote from The Unstranged Mind, 2016, from an individual with autism explaining her experiences with the disorder. So overall, ABA does not take into account the time that it takes for an individual to complete a therapy session or what it's doing to the individuals around them.
So now we're going to switch it back over to Maria to prove her points.
Hi. So Leah, you did a great job in pointing out some unfortunate aspects for ABA, but I also like to reiterate and state that with ABA, with the particular intervention of response and direction and interruption, ABA can be very helpful to children as early as 3 years old until adult size. Response interruption and redirection can help the child or that specific client kind of curb their self-stimulatory behaviors, such as motor stereotypy and vocal stereotypy, such as hand flapping, making noises, jumping up and down, spinning, things like that, where you can actually help the child be able to, sorry, I didn't know if you could see me, I was going to try to screen share, but where you can help the child know that and teach the child that it's appropriate to, at certain times in certain places, to be able to be free and earn that type of break, you can say, to release that self-stimulatory behavior. There are certain places where it's appropriate, and there are certain places that it's not appropriate. So with the response interruption and redirection approach for that intervention, I can say that it definitely does work. There are several evidence-based scientific methods that they do use, and several articles that can support the fact based on the experiment that, with this particular article that I shared on the slide, it would definitely point out the significant difference of how Chris and Adam were experimented upon on the use of response interruption and redirection. So their baseline was very high at some point, and then when the intervention of the therapy for RID came in, it could have been used with social questions, and it involved social questions as distractors, and they were also able to use that in appropriate settings and be able to earn where they can go ahead and produce those vocal or motor stereotypies during that time. So I like to share, I'm going to try to do the screen share really quickly of the slide that can show the graph. I'm kind of stuck. I'm not sure why it's not screen sharing right now. Are you able to see it?
There you go.
Okay. Because I'm not able, I don't see it. What's going on? Sorry. But in the experiment, I took a copy, I pasted it on there so you could see the graph where the baseline is up for Chris and Adam, and then it shows where they have a baseline of treatment and intervention with the intervention of the RIRD, response interruption and redirection. Fortunately, I'm not able to see the slides to share the slides to be able to go to the next one. Are you able to see this next slide? Sorry. Entire screen.
Someone messaged you, we did it.
Okay, awesome.
Leah, go
It's
to
up
the
on my
next
screen.
Sorry, I'm not able to, for some odd reason, the screen share is not working right now on my end. Is it on your end showing up?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So the slide for Chris, response interruption and redirection, shows the baseline, and then it shows the first baseline for treatment, and then the second baseline for treatment with the intervention in place. The second slide shows Adam's baseline for response and redirection, and then a baseline for the intervention again for the second treatment. So as you can tell, it goes all the way up and then down where the intervention is actually working to decrease the motor or vocal stereotypies. And so when it's used effectively, you're able to decrease those type of behaviors. There are certain places that are not appropriate where a child can freely express himself, and it's unfortunate, but children on the spectrum do have these special characteristics that produces the vocal and motor stereotypy. For example, like my son, he does that. There's certain places where he can be free and be able to allow himself to stem, and then there's other places where he can, and classrooms is one of those places. And it's unfortunate where ABA is treated as ABA could be treated as or could be stated that it's inhumane or not just for the child only because they're being punished in a way, but it's not. It's actually helping that child learn a behavior where they can control themselves to be able to focus, follow directions, be just like everybody else, and then at a certain time to be able to have that short break to be able to release those impulses that is appropriate to the public and in general education and schools and things like that. The results for response interruption and redirection for the figures for Chris and Adam graphs were depicted in figure 1 that I showed previously. And The results replicated and extended the findings of Ahern et al. From 2007 and demonstrates that response interruption redirection can be effective in decreasing vocal stereotypy without the use of incompatible responses. So vocal stereotypy can be effective to decrease inappropriate vocalizations when used properly. So there are times where someone can probably use a response interruption and redirection, and it could be used inappropriately. The focus for the intervention is to be able to use some distractors with some imitations like touch head, touch nose, close eyes, or what's your favorite color, what's your name, what's mom's names, and then try to get the child's attention or that adult's attention who's on the spectrum to be able to focus and get back to the task at hand. So at this point, I believe we're going to Leah, right?
Yep, you're right, Maria. So now we're going to switch it over to Leah, and she's going to prove her points.
Great job, Maria, exhibiting all of the data for your arguments. For my counter arguments, we're going to go back to overtreating. There was a quote from the website, The Unstranged Mind, by the woman who has autism herself, who was explaining her life story and her experience with ABA. And she reiterates, the goal of therapy should be to help the child live a better, happier, more functional life. Taking away hand flapping or spinning is not done to help the child. It is done because many people around the child are uncomfortable or embarrassed. So back to my point from earlier, some behaviors that are being treated through ABA strategies are not detrimental to be treated. They're not causing the child harm, and they're not, similar to what Maria was saying, there's a time and place for everything. There are some instances where behavior is being overtreated, where they can't exhibit this behavior ever. And that is where this issue comes about with ABA therapy. According to Kogel and Covert from an article from 1972, there were questions to consider when choosing if a behavior is relevant to be treated. And these questions consist of, does the child fail to acquire discrimination when engaging in the behavior? Meaning, is the stereotypic behavior disrupting skill acquisition and learning? This article is dated, so it is only focusing on discrimination, but for the debate purposes, I'm using these questions as just interventions in general, not just discrimination training. So again, does the child's behavior interrupt the skill acquisition that they're learning? 2, does the elimination of the behavior facilitate the discrimination acquisition? Is the skill acquisition being developed in the behavior's absence, or is there no difference? Is the child still making skill acquisition when the behavior is eliminated, or are they not? So they have to be weighed whether if there's a correlation or causation. The third question, if the child acquires discrimination without suppressing the behavior, will the behavior suppress based on the acquisition of the skill? Meaning, if the learner acquires skill acquisition without addressing the behavior simultaneously, will that skill ultimately diminish the behavior naturally? So these are all questions that were considered in 1972, and I think a lot of behavior analysts strayed away from these. I think the fundamentals are still there. However, if the behavior is not affecting skill acquisition, there are still behaviors that are being treated, although they are not affecting these areas of the learner's life, which ultimately is the flaw in ABA. My next point regards to ABA treatments affecting more than just clients. They also affect peers. So response, interruption, and redirection can cause peers to be distracted for various reasons. And I will share my screen to make it more clear. So response, interruption, and redirection is tedious and sometimes results in disruptive behavior from the individual. So sometimes these response interruptions can cause maybe an extinction burst, or maybe just a presence of overall negative behavior due to the adversive stimuli of the intervention being in place. So that could distract other learners as well. In addition, the teacher attention is then focused on the learner because this is a very hands-on method of instruction. So it's taking attention away from the rest of the class. And lastly, peers are often included as models in interactions or other intervention strategies, which is a very good thing to incorporate all peers in intervention. However, that means it's taking away from that individual's learning. So now that individual is acting as almost curriculum for a learner's program, whereas sometimes that typically developing peer is not gaining benefits from the interaction. Those interactions are where this flaw comes into effect, when it's affecting the peer negatively, not when it's involving the peer to be supportive or to be inclusive, but when it is drawing attention away from that individual's learning. There is research on how RIRD and other ABA strategies affect peers. However, as I said before, there's little research that focuses on the impact of intensive ABA on families. And that was highlighted in Grindle 2009 in the article entitled Parents' Experience of Home-Based Applied Behavior Analysis Programs for Young Children with Autism. So it focused on a lot of home therapy as well as intensive in-school therapy because most ABA programs have both. So, however, according to Grindle 2009 article, ABA has a significant impact on families. Mothers of a child with autism have a higher risk for clinically significant stress levels when compared to mothers of typically developing children. So the ABA therapy and the autism diagnosis itself affect the mothers of the children by putting them at a higher risk for clinically significant stress levels. In addition to that, families in the study have reported stressors regarding ABA therapists, including difficulties recruiting new and qualified therapists that are reliable and fit the job. 91% of mothers and 100% of fathers in Grindle's study exhibited this stressor regarding ABA therapies and therapists. There's also a high therapist turnover rate among ABA practices. 31% of mothers reported on that. And lastly, problems with therapists' presence in the home. 76% of fathers regarded stressors regarding that. 1/3 of the parents reported that their relationship was also impacted by ABA therapy for various reasons, including lack of time spent with just each other, over-involvement in therapy, or the absence from sessions. So ABA therapies are very intensive and include families in a lot of programs, which can be a good thing if it is also balanced out with the couple themselves. However, sometimes one parent will be overly present or too absent, and then that can cause strain on the marriage. ABA put a strain on our marriage. We haven't had enough time for each other purely because I am tired of all the one-to-one and the house is a mess in the evenings. This is a quote directly from a mother in Grindle's study about how her marriage is diminishing because of ABA therapies. Now, this is not the case for every marriage. However, this mother reported that the one-to-one sessions, which are very frequent in ABA therapies, are the factor that is diminishing their relationship. The next aspect that I could focus on is how it affects siblings. And in Grindle's same study, emphasized that more than 1/3 of participating families reported that a sibling had felt that he or she received less attention than their sibling with autism. So siblings stated, 70% of the siblings in the study stated that receiving less attention than the sibling with ASD was a stressor of ABA therapy. 35% reported fewer family holiday trips, and that is because many families cannot afford to hire somebody to come on a vacation with them or pick a vacation that can cooperate with their entire family that would meet the needs of the individual with autism, that would also meet the satisfaction of the rest of the family. So that was reported in 35% of siblings. And lastly, having to stay out of the way of therapy sessions in the home. Many therapy sessions are interrupted by siblings, so most siblings are encouraged to stay in the other room or just out of sight, and that was in effect on 25% of the siblings in this study. Because parents are very involved with ABA therapy sessions, their relationship with their child and or children without ASD diminishes, so it's not only affecting parent-parent relationships, but it's affecting parent-child with typically developing child relationships as well. One quote from one of the mothers in Grindel's study said, "She actually said to her teacher that she was jealous of her brother because mommy loves her more than me." That is a quote directly from a daughter of someone partaking in the study. And that just exhibits how, because the one individual is receiving so much attention from therapists and parents, the other feels left out, which in turn makes them think that the mom or dad loves their sibling more than them. Another issue with ABA is that therapy restricts the expression of emotion or feelings with individuals with autism. Dr. Lovas in 1965 quoted in a Life magazine article, "Holding any mentally crippled child accountable for his behavior and forcing him to act normal will push the child towards normality." Normal is referenced twice in this, and back to my original point, what is normal? There is no criterion to decide what is normal in this quote, nor is it a criterion in today's world. There's a very fine line between normality and acceptable behaviors when it comes to individuals with autism. In another resource, Ido in Autism Land, the author is Ido, and he is a nonverbal, what researchers and the DSM-5 would consider a lower functioning individual. He explains his frustration during session as saying, I'm sorry. As saying, yes, frustration occurs when you can't show your intelligence and neurological forces impede communication between mind and body. So although this individual is nonverbal, he still understands and receives all of the information he's inputting. However, he doesn't have the means of communication to export it. So his stereotypic behaviors are him expressing his emotions, being excited, being frustrated. He can't verbally or auditorily through a technological device express how he's feeling. So that is how he's expressing his feelings, but ABA diminishes those behaviors. Compliance training, lastly, teaches individuals that their bodies are not their own, and saying no is unacceptable. So in compliance training, if an individual does not comply directly with the instructions, they are told no, and they are told that they're not doing the right thing. That again reverts to the point that ABA is ultimately teaching individuals that there is something unacceptable about them. So that is not a practical use of discrete child training, compliance training, or ABA strategies at all, by teaching the child that there is something wrong with them. Lastly, overall, ABA is cruel and unfair to individuals with autism because sessions become overwhelming and tiring, but that doesn't mean that they'll always stop session right away. An example is mass trials of discrete child training, and that can result in the child being unmotivated or bored, which also results in non-compliance and tantrums. So ultimately, it would show that the child is frustrated or tantruming in the session, whereas they're just bored from the mass trial of index cards being placed in front of them or objects to sort. They're performing these mass trials that are just taking way too long for them. There's another quote from Ido in Autism Land that reads, "My body isn't under my mind's complete control. I know the right answer to these thrilling flashcards. Unfortunately, my hand is not fully under my control either. My body is often ignoring my thoughts. I look at flashcards. You ask me to touch tree, for example. And though I can clearly differentiate between tree, house, boy, and whatever cards you have arrayed, my hand does not consistently obey me. My mind is screaming, don't touch tree. It goes to house. Don't touch house. It goes to house. Your notes say, Ido is frustrated in session today. Yes, frustration occurs when you can't show your intelligence and neurological forces are impeding your communication. So that all comes full circle in the statement that just because the child may be nonverbal or noncompliant does not mean that they are not understanding or grasping what you're learning, what you're teaching them. That means that we just have to consider each individual specifically and modify our behavior and modify their curriculum to best fit those needs so that this noncompliance and tantrums does not come about. And lastly, I have a video that I will share my screen for, and it's a woman discussing the frustration during ABA treatment sessions. So I will pull that up. Compliance training isn't just unethical and gross, it's also dangerous.
Disabled children are many times more likely to be physically or sexually abused than non-disabled children, and that includes autistic children. The majority of abuse against children is committed against a child by somebody that they know, an adult in their life that they've probably been told to trust and to obey. For an autistic child who may already have a precarious understanding of the world and who may not understand social convention, teaching them compliance training, what it tells them is that their body is not their own, that the adults in their life can put their hands on them and can direct them, they can stop them from stimming, they can make them make eye contact. Their body is not their own, and they have no self-direction. Even if one of the theoretical goals of ABA is to teach a child to say no, the sad fact is that compliance training and behaviorism-based therapies often result in the child losing their ability to say no. They feel like they can't, thanks to the use of aversives and the withholding of rewards and love when they don't do what's wanted. A child, slowly but surely, is broken down and learns that they are not allowed to say no. This is very sad for autistic children and puts them in danger. And it also doesn't help the autistic child. No matter what the therapy is, the focus should always be on helping the autistic child where they are, helping them to develop at their own pace, and helping them to become healthy, happy autistic people. The goal should never be compliance, or making them look more normal, or making life easier for the parents, because that often means it's a lot harder for the autistic child.
Okay, so now I'm going to say my viewpoints. I believe that applied behavior analysis is effective. It's effective because in an article from Slocum et al. In 2014, they proved that ABA is an evidence-based practice. ABA is effective because, as proven by Slocum et al. In 2014, it's an evidence-based practice. As shown by Slocum et al. 2014, evidence-based practice is a model of professional decision-making in which practitioners integrate the best available evidence with client values, context, and clinical expertise in order to provide services for their clients. Therefore, evidence-based practice is one of the most reliable forms of providing service to clients. They also describe in their research that ABA addresses one of the long-standing challenges for ABA: the need to effectively support and disseminate interventions in the larger social systems in which our work is embedded. Research on the effectiveness of ABA dates back to the 1960s. Additionally, Slocum et al. 2014 portray how many years of research that serves as the underlying foundation of ABA. Slocum et al. Wrote a paper in 2014 that references a publication by Bear, Wolf, and Risley, who essentially pioneered the research of ABA more than 50 years ago. This illustrates just how many years of research and intervention that has been conducted and accumulated over time and supports the efficacy of ABA. Another fun fact is that one of the authors that accompanied Slocum in this paper is Susan Wilczynski, and she is a professor from Ball State. ABA is effective, continued. The article by Slocum et al. 2014 is a good example of how research is being conducted thoroughly and effectively. Targeting client behavior only solves one part of the issue. The greater social impact is equally as important. So according to Slocum et al. 2014, this discipline was distinguished from the experimental analysis of behavior by its focus on social impact, i.e. solving socially important problems in socially important settings. ABA has produced remarkably powerful interventions in fields such as education, developmental disabilities and autism, clinical psychology, behavioral medicine, organizational behavior management, and a host of other fields and populations. ABA is based on proven impact on larger social scale, which points to not only its societal need, but also its effectiveness as a discipline. ABA is a practice with impact on a macro scale. In summary, ABA is not only effective on a case-by-case or an individual level. It has been proven to be effective on the entire spectrum of behavioral disorders. From a different article, which Leah had mentioned before, Grindle et al. From 2009, they suggest that research has shown that home-based early intensive behavioral intervention, or EIBI, founded on the principles of ABA, can produce dramatic improvements for young children with autism. Improvements include developing effective skill repertoires, controlling challenging behaviors, and increasing levels of functioning, and in some cases, integrating into mainstream schools. So this research just shows that ABA is used, if it's used as an intervention earlier in life, it will increase the success. So now I'm going to switch it back over to Maria.
Hi, thank you, Matt. So just to go with your point, for applied behavior analysis, right, it's the science in which tactics derived from the principle of behavior are applied systematically to improve behavior, socially significant behavior, and experimentation. It's used to identify the variables responsible for behavior change, right? So when using the ABA principles to work with autistic children, children on the spectrum, we have to be able to properly follow the treatment plan that a behavior analyst sets in place. So one of those interventions is response interruption and redirection. Leah made several great points discussing how ABA can be viewed in a unwelcomed light, determining on how their practices and interventions are being applied. But there's also an increase of change when these interventions are properly implemented with personnel that are properly trained, following the ethical principles of ABA and the ethical codes of compliance. Right, so I'm going to share a little bit of, I'm going to try to screen share my screen and hopefully it works. To be able to discuss another experimental case that shows a significant improvement regarding ABA treatment.
I pulled it up on my screen, Maria. Oh,
thank you so much. Okay, so another article discussed further evaluation of response interruption redirection for vocal stereotypy. The stereotypy is a repetitive, topographically invariant motor or vocal responses that has no apparent social function. So what that looked like could be a child hand flapping, jumping up and down, making some noises, and it's not appropriate during that work, during the place where they are exhibiting these behaviors. So with ABA therapy and providing a proper intervention to be able to redirect the child to be able to self-stimulate, regulate their bodies, and to appropriately, I guess, find their way to be able to calm themselves down and to be redirected when they're out in public or in a classroom and things like that. It's not to take away their self-being of who they are. It's more to be able to control how they're feeling in the inside in a more appropriate manner to be functional during this, as they grow up or in general settings. So vocal stereotypy, however, requires special consideration because the sensory consequences may not be readily blocked or modified through physical intervention. Ahern, Clark, McDonald, and Chung, 2007, recently extended a variation of response blocking to the treatment of vocal stereotypy. The procedure called response interruption or redirection involved a teacher stating that your child's name and asking a series of questions that require the child to exhibit a vocal response. How old are you? What is your mother's name? Contingent on instances of vocal stereotypy. So if a child is stimming and having non-functional utterances or repetitive behaviors, such as repeating something over and over in order to gain that child's attention, we would do some distractors, and some of the distractors can be either motor imitations or social questions, like, for example, what is your mother's name? So this way the child can focus their attention to be able to answer something that is known to be able to stop that behavior from distracting them. The goal of the procedure was to interrupt. Oh, sorry. The goal of the procedure was to interrupt stereotypy and redirect responding to appropriate vocalizations. Results show that RIRD was effective in reducing the level of vocal stereotypy and increasing appropriate vocalizations for 4 children with autism. So in this next example, there were 4 cases, 4 different clients that had either vocal or motor stereotypy that affected them while they were in class. So Bobby and Hale, I only wanted to show 2 graphs, right, based on this experiment to further evaluate how response interruption and redirection can be utilized appropriately in order to increase or decrease the appropriate behavior that they're showing in the general population. So Bobby and Hale's data collection for vocal and motor stereotypy showed a baseline, and then it showed their response, redirection, interruption and redirection responses. Then there was another experiment with another baseline showing the difference of their response and redirection as well. As you can see, their baseline, both either Bobby and Hale's baselines, had some increase of vocal or motor stereotypy. And then when the intervention was set in place for motor and vocal response interruption and redirection, their behaviors decreased. The next slide will show that these findings indicate that the vocal and motor RIRD were similarly effective for reducing vocal stereotypy. Most notably, both interventions were associated with the increases in appropriate vocalization, suggesting that vocal redirection per se was not necessary to produce this outcome. Covariation between inappropriate and appropriate behavior has been observed with other types of responses and interventions. Iwata, Hayes, Kalsher, Kadri, and Cataldo, 1990, Parrish, and Cadway, Cataldo, Coco, Neef, and Ejo, 1986, has described that. So response interruption and redirection, PRO, the teaching appropriate times to engage in stimulatory behavior and stimulatory inappropriate behavior does not inhibit students from engaging in stimulatory behavior or inappropriate behavior, like, for example, like I stated before, hand flapping, hands in their pants, vocalizing. Instead, ABA teaches appropriate replacement behaviors or times of the day or locations to engage in these behaviors. Reference Grindle, CF, Hove, Schaff, Hastings, Remington, 2009. So these behaviors, although vocal and motor stereotypies are in place, we are able to provide that child help to intervene to be able to show appropriate vocalizations as opposed to inappropriate vocalizations. So this way they're not sticking out in public or having people look at them in a different manner. They are able to express themselves, yes, but they're now able to express themselves in an appropriate way that they can function in their daily lives without being looked at as weird. These videos provide great examples of implementing response interruption and redirection for vocal and motor stereotypy. The first video by Tina Neal, program coordinator from Project Access, discusses behavioral package response interruption and redirection. Response interruption and redirection requires blocking the child from engaging in that targeted behavior. So she will provide some distractors when the child is stimming and is not able to control their body or their vocal utterances, and they need to be redirected to be able to get back on task. The second video will also show. The second video is presented by Dr. Vincent Carbone. He describes verbal stereotypies and comments, an example of treatment of a child with autism using verbal stereotypies as a reinforcer for appropriate behavior in an academic setting. So these two videos are very important in order to share what vocal stereotypies are and how we can use them to be able to redirect a child appropriately in order for the child to be able to function independently and know where he or she can verbalize or stem appropriately in settings. Sometimes they're able to use the token board to be able to earn their tokens or for a certain amount of time when they are engaging in the appropriate behaviors without being able to vocalize inappropriate vocalizations or jumping up and down, hand flapping, spinning in circles, or repetitive talking, such as repeating movies or quotes or scripting and things of that matter. The pros and relations to the cons briefly state the main, to briefly restate the main cons of ABA. ABA restricts stimulatory behavior and this is Emily's slide.
Yep, so thank you, Maria. I was going to jump in, but we're going to switch it over now to Emily to explain the pros in relation to the cons.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily, and I'm going to be quickly jumping to my point, but first, I wanted to... All right, can you guys see that? Yep. Okay, so before I start presenting my points, I wanted to restate the argument already made by Leah, or should I say the counter argument. It says that ABA restricts stimulatory behavior, and to paraphrase the article that Leah already used, the 1956 Life magazine article, forcing a child to act normal results in normality. Again, like Leah said, this has been since disproved. We don't use these terms anymore. But that was, back in the time when ABA was coming around and terminology like this was still being used. This would mean that ABA prioritizes normality over the emotional well-being of the client. Another point that Leah made was that overtreating not only overwhelms the individual, but with highly restrictive methods, but 40 hours a week treatment is tiring and unfair. Okay, so moving on to the actual argument, there's a article written in 1988, also by the same person that wrote the article that Leah quoted. It's called The Right to Effective Behavior Treatment. And basically this article claims that in order for behavior treatment to be deemed effective, services' goal have to be personal welfare. That's one. And second, the programs have to teach functional skills. So if we're saying that ABA prioritizes normality in a context where it's neither entailing the teaching of a functional skill nor having personal welfare as the main goal, then it's not really considered effective behavior treatment. Okay, so in short, to summarize, if restricting stimulatory behavior is emotionally disturbing to the client, then the treatment is ineffective. And in turn, If restricting stimming behavior isn't intertwined with the teaching of a functional skill, then it's also effective. To put an example, if we're teaching a functional skill to replace, let's say, hand flapping, we're doing it because this behavior is frequent and it gets in the way of the learner's daily activities. For example, getting dressed, it gets in the way of walking to places, it gets in the way of completing classwork, and it interrupts other kids in class. Then in this scenario, reducing stimming behavior has the client's personal welfare as a goal, and it's also teaching a replacement skill that is necessary. So the relevant codes for this argument are Code 209, specifically Part A, where it states that clients have a right to effective treatment, which we have already defined. Also, besides overly correcting stimming behavior, Code 2.09b states that analysts must advocate for the appropriate amount of level and service provision. This is referring to the argument that 40 hours a week are stressful for the client, and I totally agree. But in most cases, it's more targeted to what the client needs more than a default setting. Clients who receive the maximum hours of services can be guaranteed to receive both effective treatment as per the Ethical Compliance Code. Also, on another note, ABA is safe and fair. Besides ABA being ethically required to be effective, it is also safe and fair for all individuals. Everyday procedures in an intervention are effective and attainable for the learner. Programs are developed after extensive assessment, and they are tailored to the learner's skill level and needs. For example, we have incidental teaching, DTT, group activities. Intervention is done in a safe therapeutic environment with qualified professionals. Here I found a video showing incidental teaching through a fun and safe activity, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. It is circle time. And I believe that is it for my part.
So now we're gonna do some Q&A, and my first question is, I believe, to Maria, and I'm gonna ask, do you have any personal experience related to this topic, and would you like to share?
Yes. Can you hear me, Matt?
I can.
Hi, yes. So my son is diagnosed with autism, and he is 8 years old, and he does have a lot of motor and vocal stereotypies. So I do believe that ABA treatment is very effective, especially when he was diagnosed when he was 2 years old. We've come a long way since receiving ABA treatment because he was a nonverbal child to a verbal child. And response interruption and redirection has helped us to be able to keep him on task and focused. At first, my husband and I weren't too, we didn't really want to do it until we started to figure out how ABA works and how the intervention in his treatment plan has probably helped him so much more, where he is able to express himself. But now he can fully function independently, but is able to calm down, self-regulate, where he can and can't body tense, hand flap, spin around in circles, or repeat certain things over and over. So this is where we have those social distractors come in play, where it's like, we'll ask him some of his favorite questions. He'll be able to focus on answering those questions and then get back on task. So with ABA intervention and their treatment, with providing treatment services for him, we were able to implement those intervention strategies at home as well, as we were provided prayer and training. And so that helped out a lot, because now he just doesn't get up in a movie theater and jump up and down, hand flap, or start screeching and screaming, or body tensing where he thinks he's the Hulk. And he's able to be redirected and knows that in 10, 15 minutes, we'll take a break and we're able to go to the bathroom. Or he can now vocalize and say, hey, I need a break because I'm feeling very excited and I want to jump up and down, mommy, or daddy, can you take me here so I can do this? And so as long as he knows that he is able to express that he needs a break, or he's able to not show certain behaviors in public places where it's appropriate, and we're able to redirect him, it has come a long way. So I truly believe that response interruption and redirection really works. My son is living proof He's been in ABA services for 6 years, and from a nonverbal child to a verbal child, and we're still working on other things, but he is more acceptable for his behaviors. Thank you.
Awesome. Very nice. And my next question is, what is your ethical responsibility in providing accurate information to parents? And I believe this is directed to Emily.
Yes, Matt, that is correct. I will answer that question. Okay, our ethical responsibility is to keep parents up to date as much as we are able to, because sometimes we want to tell them, but we don't really are authorized to speak in detail, and also they might not understand at the time, and then we run the risk of getting ahead of ourselves. So just to be on the safe side, just consult with our BCBA and ask what we are able to tell the parents, but always, trying to keep them up to date as much as possible. We also have to explain procedures, methods, and clarify whatever doubts they may have in non-technical wording that they can understand. This is very important because not only should you obviously know what you're doing, know all the technicalities ins and out, but you also have to be able to communicate it properly to the most important people besides the client, which are the parents, whoever's in charge of the child, because they are depositing all of their trust in us, and without really understanding, because it's really difficult to understand unless somebody sits down with you and explains word for word in a language that you can understand. Also, we are required to stay away from subjective and opinion-based statements and only share information that is within our scope of understanding and responsibility. This is very true. We should never use words that are opinion-based, like, for example, if we get asked, do you think my child is ever going to get better? Things like that we can't really answer without going away from what we are both required and like what our responsibility, where it ends. And also we're not really equipped to answer a question like that because we wouldn't know. We just have to stick to what we know and to what we are allowed to say. Yeah, so I think that pretty much answers that question.
Awesome, Emily. Thank you so much. And my next question is directed towards Leah, and it's, how do you respond to a parent who feels that punishment is not an appropriate treatment?
Well, first of all, Maria, thank you for sharing your personal experience, and Emily, great job answering that question. This one is a tricky one that I feel like as BCBAs we'll run into a lot. How do you respond? Parents hear punishment and they assume the worst, but we have to, as behavior analysts, assure them and be truthful when we are saying that we have executed every reinforcement procedure possible. We have tried every alternative method besides punishment before implementing this punishment procedure. Now, with that being said, it has to be made very clear and communicative to the parents that you have exhausted every other option and that the behavior at hand, whether it be aggression or something that is going to put the student or others in danger, that it will warrant this type of procedure. Now, it all depends on what the behavior is. When we say punishment procedure, punishment means that the behavior is less likely to occur in the future. So we as behavior analysts want to provide reinforcement where it's more likely to occur in the future. And ultimately, the parents have the right to say whether they want a procedure to be completed or not. But as behavior analysts, we have to explain to them what we have tried, why we've tried it, present them with research of why we've tried it, and just make it very clear to them that we're not doing this just to choose a random procedure. We're doing this systematically and effectively to make sure that we're giving their child the best possible care that we possibly can.
Very nice. Thank you, Leah. My final question is for me, and it is, how do you respond to a parent who feels that reinforcement is not appropriate because it seems as though you are training a dog? When we train dogs, we do it mostly for selfish purposes. the dog doesn't really benefit from learning how to sit or how to hold in their bodily functions. Other than the reinforcement, there isn't anything about training that will benefit the dog, and there is nothing that will impact the dog's quality of life. Yes, training a dog and teaching a human using behavioral concepts has the aspect of reinforcement in common, but it hardly makes it the same practice. Reinforcement happens when a behavior increases. In ABA, a reinforcer could be anything from a hug to a cookie. Outside of ABA, we're constantly being reinforced, and no one compares it to training a dog. And I'm going to switch my screen over now. And just show you guys some of the references that we used. And finally, we all thank you so much, and we really hope you enjoyed our debate.